JJ Thomson is considered to be the discoverer of the electron. He's also came up with a model called the Plum Pudding. Plum Pudding model describes what the inner workings or structure of the atom are. How he came up with these is through the use and observation of a cathode ray tube. Cathode ray tube has a metal plate inside of a tube on one end and another metal plate on the other end, and it's all inside of a glass tube. And the glass tube is hooked up to a power source on the ends and connected to these metal plates. The power source has a positive terminal and a negative terminal. I'm going to put the negative on this side actually. And then it has positive on the other end. This, when you hook up a battery has a negative side and then a positive side to it. And so what ended up happening is it had a negative terminal and a positive terminal inside of this tube. And when he hooked this battery up, what he saw was there was a beam of light and when he put something in the way of the beam of light, it would block it and he wouldn't see it coming out the other side, so he knew which direction it was traveling. So he had some observations. The first observation that he had was this quote-unquote beam of light traveled from left to right in this case, which was from the negative terminal to the positive terminal. So beam of light from left to right, which was the negative to the positive terminal. And what he concluded, because it was going away from the negative side and towards the positive side, his conclusion for that was that the beam had a negative, or the beam was negative. Because it was repelled or went away from the negative side of the cathode, which is over here, and went towards the positive side. So the next observation was when he took a magnet, he put the magnet up above and he noticed that when he put the magnet up above, the beam no longer traveled straight. The beam actually curved towards the magnet. So he observed that a magnet bent the beam. Well, magnets or magnetic fields don't act on light. So his conclusion from that it bent this, was that the beam had mass. There was something in there that had mass in it. So just from these two observations, he concluded that whatever's in this beam is negative and it had mass. His next set of experiments helped conclude where this beam came from. And he took out the electrode. So removed electrode, meant no beam. When he took out the electrode, there was no beam, even when he hooked up this electrical charge. And from that observation, you can conclude that the beam came from the electrode. And the beam was made out of a negative particle, because it had mass, so it was a negative particle, came from the electrode. And the electrode was just a piece of metal. So once he realized where this negative particle was coming from, he then wanted to know a little bit about whether it came from other pieces of metal. So he tried elements. So tried other electrodes. And he saw the same result, meaning always had tried other elements and it always had the same beam of light coming from it. So this negative particle was in all material that he tried. And the last, he wanted to try the simplest materials he could try or find. And the simplest materials were elements. So elements produce the same beam, and elements are only composed of one atom. So there's only one type of atom. That's all that composes an element. So if there's a negative particle coming from an element, it must be coming from inside of the element or the atom. Negative particle was somewhere inside that atom. And that's kind of key to how Thomson developed his idea of the atom. If there is a negative particle coming from inside the atom, he thought that the atom looked like this, where there's a circle similar to Dalton, and this represented the atom. But he thought that there was these little tiny negative particles inside there. And these negative particles were able to leave. So you can think of these as being part or inside of the atom. Now, he quickly realized that if you have negative particles, all matter would be negative. But he knew that matter was almost always neutral. If matter's neutral, there must be positive charges inside of the atom. So that balancing positive charges. And since he didn't see any positive particles that were leaving the atom, they must, for some reason, not be moving, and they must be stuck inside of the atom. So the way that he conceptualized that was that the whole rest of the atom was positively charged. And he thought of this as this big gooey mass of positive charge that he thought of as pudding. So his model was called the Plum Pudding model because he believed that the negative particles were the plums, or like raisins, and then they were embedded inside of this sticky positive charge. So this was different than Dalton's idea of the atom, because now JJ Thomson had shown that the atom had structure or parts. And so he started people experimenting to try and figure out exactly what it looked like inside of the atom.